Marcus Chen sat in the back corner of the conference room, his presence barely registering among the 23 other architects competing for the city's most prestigious project. While others adjusted their ties, practiced their presentations, and engaged in loud conversations about their previous achievements, Marcus simply reviewed his notes in silence. He had learned long ago that the volume of your voice rarely matched the value of your ideas. The Johnson Heights development project was worth $75 million. It would reshape the entire waterfront district, bringing housing, commerce, and community spaces to an area that had been neglected for decades. Every architecture firm in the region wanted this contract. For most people in that room, winning this project would define their career. For Marcus, it was simply the next problem to solve. "Did you see Peterson's firm brought a whole presentation team?" whispered James Miller, a young architect sitting 2 seats away from Marcus. "They've got slides, a video presentation, even a scale model. What did you bring?" Marcus glanced at his simple leather folder containing hand-drawn sketches and a 10-page proposal. "Just ideas," he replied quietly. James shook his head. "Man, you're too humble. You need to sell yourself in this business. Nobody's going to hand you anything just because you're talented. You've got to make noise, get noticed." Marcus had heard this advice countless times throughout his 15-year career. Make noise, get noticed. Sell yourself. Build your personal brand. The modern world seemed to operate on the belief that if you weren't constantly announcing your worth, you had none. But Marcus had observed something different. He had watched the loud ones, the self-promoters, the people who spent more time talking about their work than actually doing it, and he had noticed a pattern. They got attention, certainly, but attention and results were not the same thing. The presentation began with Peterson's firm, exactly as everyone expected. They had prepared a 45-minute multimedia experience complete with drone footage, testimonials from past clients, and a slickly produced video showing their vision for Johnson Heights. The presentation was impressive. The room buzzed with whispered approval. Peterson himself stood at the front, chest puffed out, confident smile fixed on his face as he described his firm's achievements. He name-dropped high-profile clients, mentioned awards they had won, and made sure everyone knew they were the biggest firm in the state. When Peterson's presentation concluded, several firms followed with similar approaches. Big promises, bold claims, impressive visuals. Each presenter tried to outdo the previous one, as if volume and spectacle could substitute for substance. Then came Marcus's turn. He walked to the front of the room carrying only his folder. No laptop, no projector, no team of assistants. The selection committee members exchanged glances. One of them, a woman named Elizabeth Harmon, who served as the city's chief development officer, leaned forward with interest. She had seen hundreds of these presentations, and she was curious about someone who dared to be different. Marcus opened his folder and began to speak. His voice was steady, but not loud. He didn't try to command the room with charisma or charm. Instead, he simply talked about the neighborhood. He spoke about Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the corner store on 5th Street, about the teenagers who played basketball in the cracked parking lot behind the old warehouse, about the families who had lived in that area for 3 generations and watched it slowly decay while developers promised change that never came. "I spent 6 weeks walking through Johnson Heights," Marcus said, his tone conversational rather than presentational. "Not as an architect looking for a project, but as someone trying to understand what this community actually needs. I talked to shop owners, residents, teachers at the local school. I sat in the park and watched how people moved through the space. I listened." He pulled out his hand-drawn sketches, passing them around the table. Unlike the glossy computer renderings from previous presenters, Marcus's drawings were simple but detailed. They showed sightlines from different angles, natural gathering spaces, how sunlight would fall on the courtyards at different times of day. Each sketch included notes about specific community needs he had discovered during his research. "Everyone who presented before me showed you beautiful buildings," Marcus continued. "I'm showing you a living community. The difference matters. Buildings are about the architect's ego. Communities are about the people who will live there." One committee member, Robert Klein, seemed skeptical. "Mr. Chen, your competitors have shown us impressive portfolios, major projects, awards. You've been very quiet about your achievements. Why should we trust someone who doesn't seem confident enough to promote themselves?" Marcus met his eyes calmly. "With respect, Mr. Klein, I came to talk about Johnson Heights. But since you asked, I've completed 32 projects in 15 years. 28 of them came in under budget and ahead of schedule. I don't win awards because I don't submit my work to competitions. I don't have a large firm because I prefer working with a small team where I can maintain quality control. And I don't promote myself because I've found that good work promotes itself. If you call any of my previous clients, they'll tell you more about what I do than I ever could. Elizabeth Harmon smiled slightly. She made a note on her pad. The presentation concluded with Marcus showing a simple timeline and budget breakdown. No fancy graphics, no elaborate promises, just realistic projections based on careful research and honest assessment of challenges they would face. When he finished, the room was quiet. Not the impressed buzz that had followed Peterson's presentation, but a thoughtful silence. As the presentations wrapped up and people began filing out, James Miller approached Marcus in the hallway. That was different, man. I'm not sure if it was brilliant or career suicide. We'll see. What Marcus didn't tell James, what he rarely told anyone, was that his approach came from hard-learned lessons. Earlier in his career, Marcus had been different. Fresh out of graduate school, with top honors, he had been confident, vocal, eager to make his mark. He had joined a prestigious firm and quickly made enemies by constantly pointing out his ideas, his contributions, his superior designs. He thought confidence meant advertising your abilities. He thought leadership meant being the loudest voice in every meeting. His first major solo project had been a disaster, not because the design was bad, but because he had been so focused on proving himself that he hadn't listened to the client's actual needs. He had created a beautiful building that won design awards but failed to serve its purpose. The client sued. Marcus's firm fired him. At 28 years old, he found himself unemployed, humiliated, and forced to reconsider everything he thought he knew about success. That failure had broken something in him, but it had also rebuilt him better. He spent the next year working construction jobs, watching experienced builders solve real problems without fanfare. He noticed how the best workers didn't talk about their skills. They just demonstrated them. He observed how the most respected foremen didn't need to assert their authority. Everyone naturally deferred to them because they had proven themselves through consistent, excellent work. Slowly, Marcus developed a new philosophy: disappear your pride. Not because pride itself was wrong, but because it got in the way. Pride made you defensive when you should be listening. Pride made you talk when you should be learning. Pride made you focus on how you appeared rather than what you accomplished. 3 weeks after the presentation, Marcus received a call from Elizabeth Harmon. The committee wanted to meet with him again, just him, for a more detailed discussion. This was unusual. Typically, they simply announced the winner. Marcus agreed to the meeting without asking questions. When he arrived at City Hall, he found not just the selection committee, but also community leaders from Johnson Heights. Rodriguez was there, the woman whose corner store he had mentioned. So was Marcus Thompson, a youth pastor who ran programs for local teenagers. Several longtime residents sat around the table, looking curious and somewhat skeptical. Elizabeth explained the situation. Mr. Chen, your presentation was unlike anything we've seen. Some committee members thought it was too simple, too small scale, but others, including myself, felt it was the only presentation that actually understood what this project should be about. So we decided to do something different. We invited the community to meet you. If they believe in your vision, you get the project. If they don't, we'll go with one of the larger firms. Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness but kept his expression neutral. He turned to the community members. I appreciate you taking time to be here. I'd like to hear what you hope this development will bring to your neighborhood. Not what you think developers want to hear, but what you actually need. For the next 90 minutes, Marcus mostly listened. He asked clarifying questions. He took notes. He didn't try to sell them on his vision because he understood that his vision was meaningless if it didn't serve their reality. Mrs. Rodriguez talked about losing customers to suburban shopping centers because her area lacked safe, attractive gathering spaces. Marcus Thompson discussed how local teenagers had nowhere constructive to spend their time. An elderly man named George Washington spoke about watching his neighborhood decline over 40 years while outsiders made promises they never kept. How do we know you're different? George asked directly. You seem nice enough, but you're still an outsider. You'll design something, collect your fee, and leave. We'll be stuck with whatever you create. Marcus considered the question carefully. You're right to be skeptical, Mr. Rupath, Washington. You've been disappointed before. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise involvement. If I get this project, I'm not designing from my office downtown. I'm setting up a workspace in the neighborhood. Every major decision, every design choice will be reviewed with a community advisory board. You won't just see the finished product. You'll be part of creating it. That's going to slow everything down. Robert Klein interjected from the committee side. Projects need decisive leadership, not designed by committee. With respect, Mr. Klein, there's a difference between decisive leadership and dictatorial leadership, Marcus replied. A good leader makes informed decisions. You can't be informed if you're not listening. Yes, it might take longer initially, but we'll avoid costly mistakes and build something that actually works for the people who will use it every day. That saves time and money in the long run. Elizabeth Harmon was watching Marcus carefully. She had been in city development for 23 years and had learned to recognize authenticity. Most developers and architects said the right things but revealed their true priorities through subtle signals. They checked their watches during community input sessions. They used phrases like stakeholder management that revealed they saw residents as obstacles rather than partners. They made promises they had no intention of keeping. Marcus was different. He wasn't performing humility or faking interest. He genuinely seemed more interested in understanding their problems than promoting his solutions. It was refreshing and, frankly, a bit unsettling. In Elizabeth's experience, people who were this humble were either extraordinarily genuine or extraordinarily manipulative. She needed to figure out which one Marcus was. After the community members left, Elizabeth asked Marcus to stay behind. That was impressive, she said. But I need to understand something. Your approach is so different from industry standard that it makes me wonder if it's authentic or strategic. Are you really this humble, or is this just a very sophisticated sales technique? Marcus smiled, the first real smile he had shown all day. That's a fair question. Honestly, it's both. I am genuinely committed to this approach because I believe it produces better results. But I'm also aware that it differentiates me from competitors. The difference is, I'm not humble as a technique to win projects. I win projects because I'm humble enough to create things that actually work. Can you explain what you mean by that? Sure. Most architects, including my younger self, approach projects with a preconceived vision. We're trained to be artists, visionaries. We want to create something that will win awards and get published in magazines. That mindset puts our ego at the center. The building becomes about us, not the people who will use it. When your ego is in charge, you stop seeing clearly. You dismiss feedback that contradicts your vision. You prioritize aesthetics over functionality. You create beautiful failures. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. When I stopped trying to prove I was brilliant and started trying to actually solve problems, my work got better, much better. Clients were happier. Projects ran smoother. Buildings functioned as intended. And ironically, my reputation grew stronger than it ever was when I was actively promoting myself. People remember good work. They forget good marketing. Elizabeth nodded slowly. And the Johnson Heights project? What do you really see happening there? Honestly, I see a 5-year process, not a 2-year construction project. I see building relationships as carefully as we build structures. I see involving the community so deeply that when we're finished, they don't see it as something imposed on them, but something they helped create. It's slower. It's harder. It requires checking my ego every single day, but it's the only way to build something that will still be thriving 30 years from now. Elizabeth studied Marcus for a long moment, then glanced at her fellow committee members. Something unspoken passed between them. Mr. Chen, Elizabeth said finally, we'll have our decision within a week. Thank you for your time. Marcus left the building with no sense of how things had gone. He had been honest, perhaps too honest. In a competition focused on confidence and showmanship, his quiet approach might seem weak. He might have just talked himself out of the biggest opportunity of his career. But as he walked to his car, Marcus felt peaceful. He had represented himself authentically. He had shown respect to the community. He had refused to compromise his principles for the sake of winning. If that cost him the project, so be it. There would be other projects, other opportunities. What he couldn't afford to lose was his integrity. That evening, Marcus returned to his small office above a bookstore in the city's arts district. His firm consisted of himself, an associate architect named Sarah Williams, and an administrative assistant who worked part-time. While Peterson's firm occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, Marcus's entire operation fit in 800 square feet. He had no debt, no inflated overhead, no pressure to win projects just to cover expenses. Sarah looked up from her drafting table as Marcus entered. How did it go? I was myself. We'll see if that's enough. Sarah smiled. She had worked with Marcus for 7 years and had learned to trust his instincts. You know what I love about working here? We don't waste time on bullshit. No office politics, no competition for credit, no meetings about meetings. We just do good work and go home at reasonable hours. Marcus nodded. This was exactly the environment he wanted to create. Small, focused, ego-free. Everyone contributed. Everyone learned. No one had to waste energy on posturing or positioning. That night, lying in bed, Marcus thought about the path that had brought him here. The younger version of himself would have been pacing, anxious, rehearsing explanations for why he deserved the contract. The current version simply reflected on whether he had done his best work. The answer was yes. Everything else was out of his control. 6 days later, his phone rang. It was Elizabeth Harmon. Mr. Chen, the committee has reached a decision. Can you come to City Hall tomorrow morning at 9? Can I ask what the decision is? You'll find out tomorrow. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the same simple suit he had worn to the presentation. The conference room was set up differently this time, with extra chairs and several cameras positioned around the room. This wasn't just a private notification. This was going to be a public announcement. As he entered, he saw Peterson and representatives from 2 other finalist firms already seated. So they were announcing the winner to everyone simultaneously. Marcus took a seat and waited quietly while Peterson chatted animatedly with colleagues. Clearly confident about his chances, Elizabeth entered with the full selection committee and several city council members. She moved to the front of the room and began speaking without preamble. Thank you all for your patience during this selection process. The Johnson Heights Development Project represents more than a construction contract. It represents our city's commitment to community-centered development. After careful consideration, extensive community input, and thorough review of all proposals, we have selected the firm we believe best embodies this commitment. Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly, but kept his expression neutral. The contract is being awarded to Chen Architecture. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Peterson's face went red. One of the other finalists actually gasped audibly. Marcus sat very still, processing the information. He had won. Against larger firms with bigger budgets and flashier presentations, his quiet approach had somehow prevailed. The announcement changed everything and nothing at the same time. Marcus Chen had won the biggest contract of his career, yet his first action was to go back to his office and review his notes again. While Peterson's firm issued press releases and gave interviews about their disappointment, Marcus quietly began the real work. The morning after the announcement, his phone started ringing constantly. Media outlets wanted interviews. Industry publications requested feature articles. Other architects called seeking advice or partnerships. Marcus declined almost everything. He gave one brief statement to the local newspaper thanking the committee and expressing his commitment to the community, then went silent again. This confused people. In an age where everyone craved publicity, where every achievement demanded a social media celebration, Marcus's silence seemed almost suspicious. You're making a mistake, James Miller told him over coffee 3 days after the announcement. James had heard about Marcus's win and wanted to reconnect. This is your moment. You should be everywhere, building your brand, establishing yourself as the architect who beat the big firms. You could parlay this into national recognition. Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. James, I didn't win this contract to become famous. I wanted to build something meaningful. Media attention doesn't help me do that. It just creates distractions. But think about future projects. If you establish yourself now, you'll have clients lining up. You could expand, hire more people, compete for even bigger contracts. Do I want to compete for bigger contracts? Marcus asked. I have enough work to keep my team busy. We make enough money to live comfortably. We create projects we're proud of. Why would I want to scale up, take on debt, hire people I don't know, and spend my time managing instead of designing? James shook his head. You're thinking too small, man. This is America. You're supposed to grow, expand, build an empire. Marcus smiled. That's one path. It's not mine. I watched my father work 80-hour weeks building a business, missing my childhood, sacrificing his health, all so he could have the biggest company in his industry. He died of a heart attack at 54. At his funeral, his competitors praised his business acumen. His employees praised his work ethic. But my mother and I just wished we'd had more time with him. I learned something from that. Bigger isn't always better. Sometimes the right size is small enough to maintain what matters. The conversation stuck with Marcus as he began the actual work on Johnson Heights. He had made promises to the community, and now he had to deliver. True to his word, he rented a small storefront in the neighborhood and converted it into a project office. Every Monday evening, he held open meetings where residents could drop by, see the latest designs, and offer input. This was unprecedented. Most developers showed communities a finished design and asked for approval. Marcus was showing them the process. At first, attendance was sparse. People had been burned too many times by empty promises. But Marcus kept showing up, week after week, genuinely listening to feedback and making changes based on community input. Slowly, trust began to build. Mrs. Rodriguez attended every meeting. She became an unofficial liaison between Marcus and the older residents who were skeptical of any outsider. One evening, she pulled him aside after a meeting. "You know why people are starting to believe in you?" she asked. "Why?" "Because you don't act like you have all the answers." When Mr. Dissitar, Washington suggested moving the community center closer to the school, you didn't defend your original design. You just said, "That makes sense. Let me see how we can make it work." Most architects, they get offended when you question their vision. You seem happy to be questioned. Marcus nodded. I am happy to be questioned. Questions reveal things I might have missed. My job isn't to impose a vision. It's to synthesize everyone's needs into a coherent design. I can't do that if I'm too proud to listen. His philosophy was tested repeatedly as the project progressed. Sarah Williams, his associate architect, sometimes struggled with the open process. She had been trained in the traditional model where architects were creative geniuses, and clients either accepted the vision or found someone else. "Marcus, we've changed the plaza design 4 times based on community input," she said one afternoon, frustration evident in her voice. "At some point, we need to just make a decision and move forward." "You're right," Marcus agreed, "and we will. But we're in the foundation phase right now, Sarah. It's much easier to make changes on paper than after construction starts. These early adjustments save us from expensive fixes later. But what if the community never agrees? What if we end up with design by committee that pleases no one?" That's a valid concern. And if we reach that point, we'll need to step in and make synthesis decisions. But we're not there yet. Right now, the feedback is making the design better, not worse. We added the covered walkway because residents pointed out how much rain this area gets. We adjusted the retail space layout because shop owners explained their actual needs. These weren't compromises that weakened the design. They were improvements we wouldn't have thought of on our own. Sarah considered this. It's just so different from how I was taught. In school, they emphasized the architect's vision, the signature style, the artistic statement. I know. I was taught the same way. But think about what we're actually building here. This isn't a museum where our artistic statement matters. It's housing, shops, community spaces. Our statement is irrelevant. What matters is whether it works for the people who will live here every day for the next 50 years. As weeks turned into months, word spread about Marcus's approach. Other architects and developers started paying attention. Some admired what he was doing. Others openly criticized it. An article in a national architecture magazine called his method painfully slow and economically inefficient. Peterson gave a quote saying, "Community input is important, but someone needs to lead. Architecture isn't a democracy." Marcus read the article once and moved on. He had learned not to respond to critics. Defending yourself just fed the controversy and distracted from the work. Let the finished project be his response. But the criticism did affect his team. Sarah came in one morning with a printout of the article. "This is getting attention, Marcus. People are talking about us, and not all of it is positive. Don't you think we should defend our process?" "Defend it how? By arguing with people who have already made up their minds? By getting into public debates that just generate more heat than light?" Marcus shook his head. "The best defense is results. When Johnson Heights is finished and thriving, that will speak louder than anything I could say now. But what if it doesn't? What if something goes wrong and we don't get to finish? Then we'll have learned something valuable, and we'll apply those lessons to the next project." "Sarah, you can't live in fear of criticism. It's going to come no matter what you do. If you succeed, people will say you got lucky. If you struggle, they'll say they knew you would fail. The only opinion that really matters is your own honest assessment of whether you're doing your best work. This conversation revealed something important. Sarah, like most people, wanted validation. She wanted others to recognize and approve of what they were doing. Marcus had moved beyond that need, not because he didn't care what people thought, but because he had learned that external validation was unreliable. Today's hero was tomorrow's failure. The crowd that cheered you on could turn against you instantly. The only stable foundation was internal conviction based on clear principles. Those principles were tested when funding challenges emerged. The project budget had been carefully calculated, but unexpected issues with the site's contaminated soil added significant costs. The City Council had to vote on whether to provide additional funding or scale back the project scope. This was exactly the kind of crisis where most developers would start making noise, lobbying council members, conducting publicity campaigns to pressure politicians. Marcus did none of this. He prepared a detailed report showing the contamination, the costs to address it, and 3 options for moving forward. He presented it to the council without drama or pressure, then stepped back to let them decide. Councilwoman Janet Torres, who had been skeptical of the project from the beginning, saw an opportunity. This is exactly what I warned about. Community-centered design sounds nice, but it leads to cost overruns and delays. I move that we reduce the project scope and reallocate the excess funds to other city needs. The debate that followed was heated. Elizabeth Harmon defended the project and Marcus's integrity. Robert Klein surprisingly also spoke in favor, saying that while he had initially doubted Marcus's approach, the architect had been more transparent and accountable than any developer he had worked with. But Torres had allies on the council who saw the budget issue as proof that the whole experiment had failed. Marcus sat quietly in the council chambers, listening but not engaging. When the mayor asked if he wanted to address the council, Marcus simply said, "I've provided all the information you need to make an informed decision. I trust your judgment." This response frustrated Torres. "Chen, aren't you going to fight for your project? Aren't you going to tell us why we should spend more taxpayer money?" "No, councilwoman. This isn't my project. It's the community's project. And it's your decision how to allocate city resources. I can design whatever scope you approve. My job is to give you accurate information, not to pressure you toward a particular decision." The council chamber fell silent. Politicians weren't used to contractors who didn't lobby, plead, or pressure. Marcus's calm acceptance of whatever they decided was almost unnerving. The vote was close, but ultimately the council approved the additional funding with modifications to the timeline. As the meeting adjourned, Mayor Richardson approached Marcus in the hallway. "That was interesting," the mayor said. "Most people in your position would have been working the phones, calling in favors, making promises. You just sat there." "I meant what I said, Mayor. It's your decision. I can advocate for what I think is right, but I can't and won't try to manipulate the process." "If the council decided to scale back, I would have designed the best possible project within those constraints. Do you know what I found most compelling about your approach?" Richardson asked him. "You didn't make it about you. Most developers, when they hit problems, they start talking about their reputation, their track record, how this reflects on them. You kept the focus on the community and the project itself. That's rare." Marcus shrugged. "My reputation is less important than whether we build something good. If I protect my ego but deliver a compromised project, what have I really protected?" Over the following months, this pattern repeated in various forms. Supply chain issues caused delays. A key contractor went bankrupt mid-project. Design elements that looked good on paper needed adjustment during construction. Each challenge created an opportunity for drama, finger-pointing, and blame shifting. Each time, Marcus simply focused on solving the problem rather than protecting his image. His team began to adopt this approach. Sarah noticed that when she stopped worrying about defending her design choices and just focused on making them work, her stress level dropped dramatically. Their part-time administrator, Linda, observed that they spent almost no time in meetings about meetings, unlike her previous job where people spent hours discussing how to discuss things. The culture Marcus created was spreading beyond his small team. Contractors who worked on the Johnson Heights project started requesting to work with him on future projects. They appreciated the absence of ego battles and political maneuvering. One contractor, Miguel Hernandez, told Marcus, "I've been in construction 30 years. This is the first project where nobody's trying to cover their ass. When something goes wrong, we just fix it instead of arguing about whose fault it is. That's how it should be. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the community itself. As residents saw Marcus consistently keep his promises, show up at meetings, accept feedback without defensiveness, something shifted. They stopped seeing the development as something being done to them and started seeing it as something they were creating together. Marcus Thompson, the youth pastor, organized a group of teenagers to help with landscaping planning. Rodriguez coordinated with local shop owners to ensure the retail spaces actually met their needs. George Washington, the elderly skeptic, became one of the project's strongest advocates, telling anyone who would listen about that quiet architect who actually listens. 18 months into the project, a film crew from a documentary series about urban development requested access. They wanted to feature Johnson Heights as an example of community-centered design. Marcus was reluctant to allow it, worried that cameras would change people's behavior and turn the process into performance. But Elizabeth Harmon convinced him that documenting the approach could help other communities. The documentary team spent 3 months filming. Their director, a woman named Rachel Kim, was fascinated by Marcus's consistent refusal to be the center of attention. During interview sessions, he constantly redirected focus to community members, contractors, and his team. When Rachel asked him directly about his philosophy, Marcus was characteristically brief. It's simple. The moment you make it about you, you've already lost. Your ego becomes a filter that distorts everything. You stop seeing clearly because you're too busy protecting your self-image. Disappearing your pride doesn't mean you have no pride. It means you're proud of the work itself, not the credit you receive for it. Rachel pushed further. But doesn't humility sometimes get mistaken for weakness? Don't you worry that people will take advantage of your quiet approach? Marcus thought about this. Sometimes, yes. I've had clients who interpreted my willingness to listen as uncertainty. I've had competitors who saw my lack of self-promotion as an opportunity to undermine me. But here's what I've learned. People who confuse humility with weakness eventually reveal their own weakness. And people who value substance over performance recognize the difference. The documentary aired 8 months later during the project's final phase. It generated unexpected attention. Marcus suddenly found himself on the receiving end of interview requests from business publications, architecture schools, and management consultants. Everyone wanted to know about his method, his philosophy, how he had achieved such remarkable results while maintaining such a low profile. True to form, Marcus declined most of these requests. He did agree to speak at one architecture school, but only because his former professor, the one who had helped him rebuild his career after his early failure, personally asked him to address students. Standing before 200 eager architecture students, Marcus felt the weight of their expectations. They wanted secrets, techniques, a formula for success. What he gave them was simpler and harder than they expected. Most of you will leave this school believing that architecture is about your vision, your creativity, your genius, he began. You'll think success means winning awards, getting published, becoming famous. And if that's what you want, you can probably achieve it. But I want to offer you a different definition of success. He paused, looking around the auditorium. Success is creating something that still works perfectly 20 years after you've moved on to other projects. It's having clients who trust you so completely that they don't need contracts full of protective clauses. It's building a career where you can sleep peacefully at night because you know you did honest work. None of that requires fame. None of it requires self-promotion. It just requires that you care more about the work than about yourself. But Mr. Chen, how do you get clients if you don't promote yourself? How do people even know you exist? Good work promotes itself, Marcus replied. Every satisfied client tells others. Every successful project demonstrates your capabilities. Yes, this is slower than aggressive marketing. Yes, it means you might not become wealthy or famous. But it also means you build something sustainable. Your reputation isn't based on hype that can collapse overnight. It's based on actual results that people can see and verify. Another student spoke up. Isn't that just privilege talking? Maybe you can afford to be humble because you're already established. What about those of us starting out who need to get noticed? That's a fair challenge. That's a fair challenge. And you're right that my current position gives me more freedom. But I'll tell you this. I was unemployed and working construction jobs when I adopted this approach. I didn't wait until I was established to become humble. Humility helped me become established. When you're starting out, you have 2 paths. You can try to fake confidence and expertise you don't have, which usually gets exposed eventually. Or you can be honest about what you know and don't know, be genuinely eager to learn, and focus on delivering exceptional work even on small projects. The second path takes longer, but it builds a foundation that lasts. The Johnson Heights development project reached completion 3 years and 2 months after Marcus Chen received the contract. On paper, this represented a 4-month delay from the original timeline. In reality, considering all the unexpected challenges encountered, it was a minor miracle that the project finished so close to schedule. More importantly, it came in just 2% over the adjusted budget, a figure that stunned city officials accustomed to massive overruns. But the real measure of success wasn't in timelines or budgets. It revealed itself on opening day when Marcus stood at the edge of the new community plaza and watched families explore their transformed neighborhood. Children played in the water features that residents had specifically requested. Elderly couples sat on benches positioned exactly where George Washington had suggested, offering perfect views of the sunset. Shop owners arranged their windows in the retail spaces designed around their actual business needs rather than an architect's aesthetic vision. Rodriguez found Marcus standing quietly near the community center entrance. "You know what's different about this place?" she asked. "What's that?" "It doesn't feel like someone else's design that we have to live with. It feels like ours, like we built it ourselves, even though we know you did most of the actual work." She squeezed his arm. "That's the gift of stepping back." "You let us step forward." The opening ceremony itself revealed the stark difference between Marcus's approach and conventional development. City officials had planned a typical ribbon cutting with speeches from politicians and project leaders. Marcus had quietly suggested a different format. Let community members speak about what the development meant to them, and keep official remarks brief. Mayor Richardson, who had come to respect Marcus deeply, agreed. The result was a ceremony where the heroes weren't the developers or architects, but the residents themselves. Marcus stood in the back of the crowd, barely visible, which was exactly where he wanted to be. Peterson attended the ceremony with several members of his firm. He approached Marcus afterward, his expression a mixture of respect and confusion. "I've been thinking about this project for 3 years," Peterson said. "Trying to understand how you beat us. My firm has more resources, more experience, bigger portfolio. We should have won." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "You think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of serving and building. That's the difference." "But you did win. You got the contract. I got an opportunity to do meaningful work. That's different from winning a competition. If your firm had gotten the contract and built something the community loved, I would consider that a victory for good architecture. The project's success matters more than whose name is on it." "I don't understand you, Chen. In this business, credit matters. Recognition matters. Building your brand matters. You act like none of that exists." "It exists. I just don't let it drive my decisions." There's a difference between acknowledging reality and being controlled by it. As Peterson walked away, still puzzled, Sarah Williams appeared at Marcus's side. Over the 3 years of the project, she had transformed from a traditionally trained architect trying to adapt to Marcus's methods into a true believer in the quiet approach. "I've been offered a position," she told him. "One of the developers who attended the opening wants me to lead their community engagement division. Good salary, benefits, chance to spread this approach to more projects." Marcus smiled. "That's wonderful, Sarah. Are you going to take it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to stay here, keep working with you, but part of me thinks I should take what I've learned and apply it elsewhere." "Then you've already answered your question. Growth sometimes means moving on. I'll be sad to lose you, but I'd be selfish to hold you back." "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Most bosses would try to convince me to stay, make counteroffers, maybe even get upset. You're immediately supportive of what's best for me, even though it creates a problem for you. Your growth matters more than my convenience. That's not nobility, Sarah. It's just recognizing that we're all temporary stewards of whatever we're building. The work continues, with or without us. The question is whether we leave it better than we found it." This conversation reflected a pattern that had emerged throughout the Johnson Heights project. People who worked with Marcus often moved on to spread his philosophy elsewhere. His quiet approach was infectious, not through aggressive promotion, but through authentic demonstration. Those who experienced it wanted to replicate it in their own contexts. 3 months after the opening, Harvard Business School requested to write a case study about Marcus's approach. A professor named Dr. Michael Torres had become fascinated by what he called leadership through intentional invisibility. Marcus was reluctant, as always, about attention. But Dr. Torres made a compelling argument. You've discovered something important about how ego interferes with effectiveness, the professor explained during their first meeting. Most leadership research focuses on charisma, vision, influence. You've demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful leadership is nearly invisible. That's worth documenting. Over the course of several interviews, Dr. Torres dug deeper into Marcus's philosophy. He wanted to understand not just what Marcus did, but why it worked. Help me understand the connection between pride and results, Dr. Torres said during one session. You keep saying disappearing, your pride multiplies your results. Why? Marcus thought carefully before responding. Pride creates friction. When I'm worried about getting credit, I resist collaboration because I don't want to share recognition. When I'm concerned about my reputation, I make defensive decisions instead of optimal ones. When I'm focused on how I appear, I miss important information because I'm not really listening. All of that creates friction that slows everything down and reduces quality. But doesn't some ego drive excellence? Don't we need pride to push ourselves to do great work? There are different kinds of pride. There's pride in your work, which drives excellence. And there's pride in your status, which just drives ego protection. The first kind makes you better. The second kind makes you brittle. I cultivated the first and eliminated the second. Dr. Torres scribbled notes. And how did you learn to distinguish between them? Failure, Marcus said simply. My first major project failed because I confused my vision with good design. I was proud of what I had created, but it didn't serve the client's needs. That failure taught me that my pride was irrelevant. What mattered was whether the building worked. Once I internalized that lesson, everything changed. Do you ever struggle with ego now? Does it ever creep back in? Marcus laughed. Every single day. Ego doesn't disappear just because you recognize it's problematic. I still feel defensive when people criticize my work. I still want recognition for my contributions. The difference is I've learned to recognize those feelings and not let them control my decisions. It's like training a muscle. You get better at it with practice, but you're never finished. The Harvard case study was published 6 months later and generated significant academic interest. Business schools started using it to teach leadership principles. Management consultants began incorporating Marcus's approach into their frameworks. Ironically, Marcus's intentional invisibility was making him increasingly visible in certain circles. This created an interesting problem. Marcus had built his entire approach on being quietly effective. Now people wanted him to be publicly effective, to share his methods, to become a voice in the conversation about leadership and development. Every request came with the same underlying message. We value what you do. Now please stop doing it quietly and start promoting it. Marcus faced a genuine dilemma. If he continued refusing all publicity and speaking requests, he might miss opportunities to influence positive change in his industry. But if he accepted them, he risked becoming the very thing he had rejected. Someone more focused on their message than their work, more concerned with teaching others than continuing to practice himself. He discussed this with his wife Karen over dinner one evening. They had been married for 12 years, and Karen had watched Marcus transform from the ambitious, ego-driven young architect she had married into the quiet craftsman he had become. What does your gut tell you? She asked. My gut says that the moment I start trying to teach this approach, I'll stop actually living it. Teaching requires a different mindset. You have to simplify, create frameworks, repeat core messages. That's all fine, but it pulls you away from the actual work. So you're going to say no to all of it? Not all of it. I'll do occasional speaking if it's for students or practitioners who can directly apply the ideas. But I won't become a professional humble leadership guru. That would be absurdly ironic. Karen smiled. You know what I love about you? You're constitutionally incapable of being a hypocrite, even when hypocrisy might be profitable. The decision to remain primarily a practitioner, rather than becoming a teacher, meant turning down lucrative opportunities. A major publisher offered a book deal. 3 different consulting firms wanted to partner with him to develop training programs. A TED Talk invitation arrived. Marcus declined all of them politely but firmly. Instead, he took on a new project, a low-income housing development in a struggling neighborhood on the other side of the city. The contract was much smaller than Johnson Heights, the budget tight, the timeline aggressive. Most architects at his level would have seen it as beneath them. Marcus saw it as the next problem to solve. Word of this decision reached Peterson, who called Marcus for the first time since the Johnson Heights opening. "Chen, I'm hearing you turned down a book deal and consulting contracts to build subsidized housing. Have you lost your mind? Do you know how much money you're leaving on the table?" "I know exactly how much. I just don't care. But why?" "You've proven your point. You've demonstrated your approach works. Now capitalize on it. That's how the game is played." Marcus chose his words carefully. "Peterson, I respect that you play the game differently than I do, but I don't want to capitalize on my approach. I want to keep practicing it. Money isn't my scoreboard. Every time I choose a project based on how much I can charge, rather than how much good I can do, I compromise the very principles that made me effective in the first place." Finally, Peterson spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You really mean that, don't you? This isn't strategy or positioning. You genuinely believe what you're saying." "I do. Then I owe you an apology. When you won the Johnson Heights contract, I thought you had just found a clever marketing angle. I didn't believe anyone actually operated the way you claimed to. But watching you turn down opportunities that would make most of us salivate, I'm starting to understand. You're not playing a long game. You're not playing a game at all." "We're all playing some kind of game, Peterson. I've just chosen one with different rules and different victory conditions. In my game, winning means sleeping peacefully at night knowing I did honest work that served real needs. That might sound naive to you, but it's kept me sane and productive for 15 years. After the call ended, Marcus sat in his office thinking about how far he had come from the ambitious young architect who had prioritized awards over impact. That younger version of himself would have jumped at the book deal, the TED Talk, the consulting contracts. He would have seen them as validation, as evidence of having made it. The current Marcus recognized them as distractions from what actually mattered. The low-income housing project became another opportunity to practice his principles. Once again, he set up a project office in the neighborhood. Once again, he held weekly community meetings. Once again, he listened more than he talked. The process was familiar now, almost meditative. He had discovered that disappearing his pride wasn't a one-time decision, but a daily practice, like meditation or exercise. Some days it came easily. Other days his ego screamed for recognition, for credit, for validation. Those were the days when practicing the principle mattered most. 5 years after the Johnson Heights opening, Marcus received a call from Elizabeth Harmon. She had been promoted to state-level development oversight and wanted to discuss a statewide initiative to incorporate community-centered design principles into all major public projects. "We want you to help write the guidelines," Elizabeth said. "Your approach has been so successful that we think it should become standard practice." Marcus felt conflicted. This was exactly the kind of systemic change he believed in. But he also knew that codifying principles into guidelines often killed the spirit that made them work. What worked for him wasn't a set of rules, but a mindset. And mindsets couldn't be mandated. "I'm on it," he told Elizabeth. "But I'm worried that turning this into official policy might backfire. The heart of this approach is genuine humility and authentic listening. You can't mandate authenticity. The moment it becomes a requirement, people will just go through the motions without internalizing the principles. So what do you suggest? Incentivize it instead of requiring it. Create a certification program that recognizes developers and architects who genuinely practice community-centered design. Make it prestigious enough that people want to earn it, but keep the standards high enough that it means something. I'll help design the certification criteria, but I won't be the face of it. Get younger practitioners involved. Make it about the next generation, not about me." This conversation led to the creation of the Community-Centered Design Collaborative, a professional organization that Marcus helped found, but intentionally did not lead. He served on the advisory board, contributing ideas and reviewing certification applications, but he made sure others received public credit and visibility. Young architects like James Miller, who had once criticized Marcus's quiet approach, eventually became some of the certification program's strongest advocates. James had watched Marcus's career trajectory and finally understood what his old acquaintance had been trying to tell him years ago. The loud approach James had favored had brought him quick wins but unstable results. Clients were never quite satisfied. Projects encountered resistance. James constantly felt like he was pushing, selling. One day, James showed up at Marcus's office unannounced. "I need to learn from you," he said simply. "I've been doing this all wrong." Marcus invited him to shadow the low-income housing project for a month. No payment, no formal arrangement, just observation and conversation. James accepted. What he learned during that month transformed his entire approach to architecture. He watched Marcus handle conflicts by listening deeply rather than defending positions. He saw how Marcus's willingness to be wrong made everyone else more willing to contribute ideas. He observed how the absence of ego created space for genuine collaboration. "The hardest part is not talking," James confessed one afternoon. "My instinct is always to jump in with my ideas, my solutions, my vision. Staying quiet feels like wasting time." "It is wasting time if you're just waiting for your turn to talk," Marcus agreed. "But if you're actually absorbing what others are saying, truly understanding their perspective, it's the most productive use of time." Half the conflicts in development come from people solving the wrong problems. We rush to solutions before fully understanding the situation. Silence forces you to understand first. This mentality slowly spread through the architecture community. Not everyone embraced it. Many architects still operated in the traditional mode of ego-driven design. But enough practitioners adopted Marcus's principles that it created a noticeable shift in how community projects were approached. 10 years after the Johnson Heights project, studies showed that developments using community-centered design principles had significantly higher satisfaction rates, lower maintenance costs, and better long-term outcomes than conventionally designed projects. Marcus watched this shift with quiet satisfaction. He had never set out to change his industry. He had simply focused on doing good work according to clear principles. The fact that others found value in his approach and chose to adopt it was gratifying, but it wasn't his goal. His goal remained the same it had been for 20 years. Solve the problem in front of him as well as possible, then move to the next one. On the 20th anniversary of Johnson Heights' opening, the city organized a celebration. The development had become a model referenced nationally and internationally. Property values in the area had increased significantly, but long-time residents had been protected through community land trusts that Marcus had built into the original plan. Businesses thrived. Crime rates had dropped. The neighborhood had transformed while maintaining its character and community cohesion. Marcus attended the anniversary celebration reluctantly, knowing his presence would be expected but dreading the attention. Mayor Richardson, now in her final term, spotted him trying to blend into the crowd. "Not so fast, Chen. You don't get to hide today." "I was hoping to just observe." "I know you were. But these people deserve to see the man who made this possible. These people made this possible. I just facilitated." The mayor laughed. 20 years later and you still won't take credit. "That's exactly why you deserve it. Come on. I promise to keep the speeches short." The event featured presentations from community leaders, business owners, residents who had lived in Johnson Heights since the beginning. Each speaker told stories about how the development had changed their lives. None of them focused on Marcus, which was exactly how he preferred it. But at the end, Rodriguez, now in her 80s, insisted on saying a few words about the quiet architect. Many people worked on this project. She began, her voice strong despite her age. Engineers, contractors, city officials, and especially the residents who contributed ideas and feedback. But there was one person who made it all possible by getting out of the way. Marcus Chen taught us that the best leadership is often invisible. He showed us that you can be powerful without being loud, influential without being domineering, successful without being proud. For 20 years, this neighborhood has thrived because one man had the wisdom to disappear his pride and let the community shine. That's a lesson worth remembering. The crowd applauded. Marcus felt his eyes water but maintained his composure. After the formal program ended, he walked through the neighborhood one last time, observing how spaces he had designed 20 years ago were being used and adapted by new generations. The plaza where children played today would host the grandchildren of the original residents tomorrow. The community center that started as sketches on his drafting table had become a genuine hub of neighborhood life. George Washington, now 94 years old and using a walker, spotted Marcus near the fountain. "You still alive, young man?" George had called him young man for 2 decades now. "Washington, how are you?" "Old, tired, but happy." "You know why I'm happy?" Because I got to see something rare. I got to see someone make a promise and keep it. Not just once, not just in the big things, but every single day for years. You said you'd listen, and you listened. You said you'd involve us, and you involved us. You said you'd build something that would last, and look around. It lasted. We all built it together. There you go again, spreading the credit around. But I'm old enough to know the truth. Yes, we all contributed. But without someone willing to genuinely receive and integrate those contributions, none of it would have mattered. That someone was you. Don't argue with an old man. Marcus laughed and helped George settle onto a nearby bench. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood live and breathe around them. That evening, Marcus returned to his office for the last time. After 25 years in the same 800 square feet above the bookstore, he was finally retiring. His team had grown to 4 people over the years, intentionally kept small. Sarah Williams had returned after a decade running community engagement programs for a major developer, wanting to finish her career the way she had started it, working with Marcus. They would continue the firm under a new name after his retirement. Cleaning out his desk, Marcus found a folder of photographs from the Johnson Heights project. Images of community meetings, construction progress, opening day celebrations. In most of the photos, he was barely visible or completely absent. Yet his influence permeated every image. He thought about the journey from that ambitious young architect who needed constant validation to the quiet practitioner who found satisfaction in work itself rather than recognition for it. The transformation hadn't been easy or fast. It had required failure, humility, consistent practice, and daily recommitment to principles that often felt counterintuitive in a culture obsessed with self-promotion. But the results spoke for themselves. Not just Johnson Heights, but dozens of other projects completed over the decades. Hundreds of satisfied clients. Thousands of people living in spaces that genuinely served their needs. And perhaps most importantly, a new generation of architects and developers who had learned that disappearing your pride really did multiply your results. As Marcus locked the office door for the final time, he reflected on what he had learned. True power didn't come from being the loudest voice or the most visible presence. It came from being so secure in your purpose that you didn't need external validation. Success wasn't about how many people knew your name, but about how many lives you had improved. Victory wasn't declared with trumpets and parades, but quietly demonstrated through work that lasted long after you were gone. The wars that really mattered weren't won by the loudest generals, but by the quiet strategists who understood that every battle wasn't about them. The builders who changed communities weren't the ones with the biggest egos, but those humble enough to see beyond themselves. The leaders who created lasting impact weren't those constantly seeking credit, but those secure enough to share it. Marcus Chen had learned the hardest lesson anyone can learn, that disappearing your pride doesn't diminish you. It frees you. It allows you to do your best work because you're not burdened by the constant need to protect your ego. It lets you hear clearly because you're not defensive. It enables you to collaborate genuinely because you're not worried about who gets credit. It permits you to fail and learn because you're not trying to maintain a false image of perfection. In the end, the principle was simple even if practicing it was hard. The moment you stop caring about being recognized as great and start caring about doing great work, you become capable of greatness. Silent men don't win wars because they're weak. They win because they're free. Free from the burden of ego. Free from the distraction of self-promotion. Free to focus entirely on what actually matters. And that freedom Marcus had discovered was the greatest victory of all.